Hey, what's up, everybody? It is your girl, Leah Flores with Between the Sheets, and I am so stoked to be here once again. I know it's been a minute for you guys, but life, business, everything just kind of gets in the way, but I always want to try to stay consistent and show up for you guys. So very excited to be here. Very, very stoked about my next guest that we're going to have on. And I will introduce her in just a second. I want to remind you guys that on this show, we get very, very intimate on business, life, relationships, health, and the journey thereof. It is my mission to give my listeners the tips, takeaways, things that can actually help them in their life, their business, their relationships that they can implement right away to, whatever endeavor they're in their life, their journey, their relationships, their business. So I want to go ahead and kick it off, you guys, and bring this guest right on. Let's go ahead and do this. Okay, guys, so who do I have? Who is my special guest on this particular episode on Between the Sheets? And, we when we were chatting back and forth, when I asked her about her life, and she said, it's twisted as fuck. And I was like, you know what? I think that's going to be the name of this next podcast, Twisted as Fuck, because aren't we all just a little bit fucked up? So very excited. Her name is Andrea Mendoza. We were also teasing about the name and pronunciation. She's got Mendoza at the end. So my Latina in me was like, okay, here we go. But it is Andrea Mendoza. And this woman is a boss. She is a boss. I took her class, and I honestly can't remember if it was at PPA or WPPI. But she was teaching on content planning and awareness and just life in general, how you plan and commit to these big extravagant events and the smaller ones that you actually want to do. And I took everything she said, her gracious heart. She spilled her beans about everything she does in her business. I took it. I started to implement it. I tried to implement it as best I can. It didn't go as smoothly as possible, but hey, that was our first try. So with no further ado, I would like to bring this business coach, mentor, educator, teacher, a photographer, just all of, and at the end of the day, a human being with a gracious and abundant heart, Andrea Mendoza. Hi, Andrea.
Hi guys. So glad to be here. My goodness. I'm thrilled.
I'm so stoked to have you, and I'm honored that you gave me the platform to be able to just kind of, chat with you for a bit and just kind of get really intimate. There's a lot going on right now. There's a lot in the industry going on. I had, completely no clue. I was very unaware. I do try to stay off social media unless I'm posting about my business, or it can be very tiresome. I'm sure you know that. And so I wasn't on, and then I, kind of got on and started seeing some things, and I'm like, what in the hell has happened in this world of our boudoir industry? And, started to reading comments and things like that. And so at the end of the day, there's some shit that went down. Okay. We're not going to spend our time. We're not going to spend our energy on that. I heard, both comments, I heard both things. And, I think what really struck me at the end of the day was that the people, on both sides were really taking accountability and saying, hey, we can do better. We can do more. Their feelings were taken into consideration. And, God, I just thought, it's important to understand that we are all human beings at the end of the day, and we are all doing the very, very best that we can. And everybody has a lot of shit going on. And sometimes we don't always showcase that. And you had went up on the group and you did a live, and you really just kind of let your heart out from what I can see and what I could feel. And some of the comments that you said in there touched me in a way that, again, just remembering that we're human beings and that we have no idea, above and beyond this, whether it's a filter, whether it's a mask, I think you called it, that there's shit on the inside that's going on sometimes. And we have the choice whether or not, we want to allow that out. And so that's really what intrigued me, number one, about you, is that you talked about trauma in your life, and you talked about a lot of things that you have been through. And I thought it was really important to hear your voice and hear your story because you are out there doing your thing, girlfriend. And you are doing this out of the kindness of the industry. I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, so that other people can learn and grow and we can elevate our industry as much as possible. And I think that that's just badass. And with that being said, personal life still happens. Things still happen.
Yeah. Personal life is such a massive part of how we choose to show up in the world, right? Like there's so much that has gone on in each of our lives that really curates the dynamic in how we engage with the world. And my life story is involved. We'll call it that. And it really does impact and have a massive kind of effect on how I show up in the world, because there's a lot of things that I went through and a huge part of just my life story that has curated my personality and my sense of self and the things that I prioritize uh, in why I show up in the world the way that I do. And honestly, the reasons why I'm even in the boudoir industry in
You just said a lot right there. And I want to start, like, I want to go back. So I'm going to ask you a lot of pointed questions about your life and kind of where you, because at the end of the day, I think what we see, right, as learning photographers or mentees or whatever, is that we see this, strong, successful woman doing her thing, being an educator and teaching and doing and out there. And what we may fail to see are those things that made us who we are and why we move the way that we do. And those are all such key important things. I mean, there's trauma that happens in people's life that, I always call them bruises. What I say is that we all have bruises in our life that other people can't see. But when somebody touches it, if somebody touches that bruise, holy shit, like, you be like, what the hell happened here? And it's because you touched my bruise that was unseen. But we have trauma and we have things that we dealt with, but it's also those very things that, gosh, made you who you are today, which in my eyes is a brilliant, I heard you talk about software and things like that. We're going to talk about that too, but it makes you a brilliant, brilliant woman. So tell me, kind of start at the beginning, like, who you are, where you came from, and where maybe some of your trauma started for you.
Yeah, I would love to do that. So buckle up because it's a bit of a story. Anyone who gets the opportunity to kind of hear me delineate just the surroundings of kind of my life and where I've been and what has landed me into kind of the person that I have been today is they look at me and they're like, wow, you need to write a book. And I'm like, that's a long book. But I love the opportunity to kind of dive into this with you guys. So my story really begins with and starts with the fact that I grew up in a very, very kind of difficult family. And I am also neurodivergent.
Can
And
you pause really quick right there and tell me what the hell the word, I heard that word being thrown around so many times and I'm like, am I a neurodivergent? Tell me what it means.
potentially, I found that like a huge majority of the creative industry that we're in are neurodivergent. So basically, what you're talking about is you're talking about autism and you're talking about ADHD. So it's basically a different brain setup than allistic people, who are people who don't have autism and don't have potential ADHD. I have both. So I am considered
So
autism.
ADHD and autism. Wow.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I have both ADHD and autism, and I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was like a preteen, but that was in the 90s.
Okay.
And in the 90s, when you were diagnosed with ADHD, you were it wasn't the same. They thought that you were going to grow out of it, that you are just basically in this space where you have attention deficit issues, right? And so it was treated kind of callously when I was younger, and like it wasn't a big deal. Like I was just supposed to take medication when I was trying to study and all of these different types of things. But I didn't know that I had autism until much later on in life. And it was really just like a number of different factors that kind of made me start looking at my history and my life and going, oh man, there were like so many, like, there were so many factors that could have been seen when I was younger to be able to provide me accessibility to tools and all of that good stuff, but nobody knew, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that flew under the radar for me is that my family unit is tricky because I am the youngest of four. I have two older brothers, and then I had an older sister as well that we're going to go into. And my older sister had Down syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And
How much older was she than you?
she was 3 years older than me, a little under 3 years older.
All
And I always,
biological parents as well?
yes,
Okay.
biological parents as well. And I called her my big little sister because she was my big sister, but mentally she was almost always younger than me.
Mm-hmm.
And was by default kind of my tag along because we were the only girls. So she would spend time with me and my friends tagging along pretty much the entire time that I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a term that is used that describes children of younger siblings, basically, of children with disability. And they call them glass children because they're seen through.
Mm.
And I think that part of the reason why my neurodivergence, my, the differentiation and kind of the way that my brain is set up, it wasn't recognized in my younger years is because my parents were so focused on the medical necessities of my older sister.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went my entire adolescence really just not acknowledging these major, major differences in the way that my brain works. And that caused a host of issues. So my whole family is actually Mormon. So, and like we're talking generations upon generations upon generations.
And
deep.
that is a story upon itself, right? I mean, because I have a girlfriend, I have a very, very, very close-knit girlfriend who grew up in the Mormon community. And, I'm not going to say anything negative or anything like that, but the rules, the regulations, and being either chastised or just kind of kicked out for certain reasons is really traumatizing in itself.
It is. And it's a tricky dynamic because much like many other different types of religion, there is doctrine that is accessible to children that is much more simplistic. And that's true in the Mormon church as well, right? Like when you're a child in the Mormon church, you're really just taught that like God loves you. You need to love your neighbor. The family unit is like the most important thing that you can have, any number of different things with respect to just positivity, light, all of that good stuff. And then the doctrine really changes as you get older and you're taught to do things like judge righteously, right? That's what they call it, righteous judgment. In the sense that and this is a normal thing in everyday life where you are making decisions on whether or not someone is engaging with you in a way in life that upholds your value system.
Mm-hmm.
And Mormon church, that happens around 11-ish years old. And so the doctrine changes away from kind of just like, you are everyone's God's children, like love your neighbor, like you need to just be kind and good to all of the different people. And it shifts over into this righteous judgment, but it also shifts very, very heavily into kind of patriarchal ideas and general structural organization of the church, which is that the men are kind of the power holders,
The
right?
hierarchy.
There's this thing called the priesthood, which is essentially like a blessing of enlightenment, so to speak, that they become the leaders of the family and the people who receive insight from God on how things should engage and be acted upon within the family unit. And then women are kind of taught to move into this role where they are like this, almost, they're put on this pedestal in terms of their importance within the family unit as
Baby
the,
makers?
yeah.
Sorry, I could see your brain, and I'm just like, that's at least what I've heard. I don't know, that's what I've heard.
Yes, how do I say this? Yes, where you are baby makers, you are in charge of kind of like creating the glue for the family unit, but your overall role inside of it is to maintain your personal chastity because of the importance of purity within this just general dynamic.
So
And that,
before you go on, let me ask you a question.
mhm.
When in your life did this stop like connecting with you? Was it?
When I was 11 years old,
Mm,
when that
mm.
doctor did. And I will explain to you why. So there's a couple different reasons why I feel like I had a really, really difficult time connecting with the doctrine. One of them has to do with the fact that I've been autistic my entire life. What that means for me is I'm extremely logic based. So I cannot connect dots in a situation and make sense of like what someone is teaching me. I'm extremely skeptical of it in this situation because I spent the entirety of my childhood being molested by other kids. I grew up in a neighborhood where that was predominantly Mormon. We lived in Utah until I was 6 years old. And the entire time that I was living in that neighborhood, there was sexual abuse that was running rampant amongst the kids. And it wasn't ever discussed. We didn't talk about sex. We didn't talk about, there was like an overall umbrella kind of like sheltering that took place. But this epidemic of sexual like exploitation was taking place amongst all of the kids.
And nobody
There
ever spoke up, or people spoke up, and it was just.
I don't know that anyone ever spoke up. There was so much shame tied to sex. Like I remember, there's not a whole lot about my young childhood that I remember,
Yeah.
other than the trauma that I withstood from other kids. I can literally remember almost every instance where a child my age or a child a little bit older than me or a babysitter or something like that engaged in sexual behavior with me. And I remember things like accidentally finding like a violent porn video in my dad's like VCR type of thing.
Wow.
And I remember circumstances of just being exposed to sex, but I also remember circumstances where I was engaging in self pleasure at a very young age because, again, I had been sexualized at that point and had access to and understood kind of like the good feelings that were associated,
Right.
like the good physical feelings that were associated with all of that stuff. And I remember getting caught by my dad and being so heavily shamed for it that it was just like, oh my God, I can never talk about like all of this other stuff. This is bad. This is wrong. This is nothing that I should be doing, et cetera, et cetera. So,
And yet, some of
not
the places that you saw some of this stuff was in your own home.
correct. Yes, absolutely. And so it was a very, very confusing period of time for me because when you are 11 years old and the doctrine shifts because you move away from like Sunday school, primary, like just children's doctrine type of stuff, and you move into adolescence, adolescent group, they start talking about chastity in unequivocal levels, like in ways that I cannot explain to you. So from the time that I was 11 years old, I was exposed to sexual abuse. And I remember things like accidentally finding like a violent porn video in my started this relationship with myself seated on deep, deep shame. I had already been broken. There was an analogy that is commonly referred to in the Mormon church. I don't know that they use it anymore, but it was definitely a popular analogy that was used when I was growing up. And it was essentially the idea that your chastity is like a piece of gum. And once you chew it, you cannot get it back. And I was chewed gum.
Wow.
By the time that I had, shifted over into this adolescent education go ahead.
Does that make you, so when you say that, when, in that particular community, does that make you then like you get shunned? Do you like, or is there a way to redeem yourself, or is there, what happens?
Yeah. So I absolutely made it a point to like tell nobody anything, right? Like I wasn't talking about my abuse at that particular moment in time because I didn't know it was abuse. To me, it looked like I had let kids do things to me that I shouldn't have, or I had engaged in behaviors that I shouldn't have, and I needed to feel shame and guilt for engaging in those things, right? So that really created kind of like a rift for me with respect to the way that I engaged with the religion, and started this whole process where I started questioning all of the things in the church, all of the teachings, to the point that like I remember circumstances where my parents would tell me things like, you need to have childlike faith. And I'm sitting here going, I am a child and I don't have faith in this, right? Like, I don't have the ability to just look at this and say, I believe without consequences, right? I remember circumstances where my parents would bring missionaries into our house to have me go through. It's when missionaries are teaching the gospel to potential members. They call them discussions, right? They have a various like series of discussions that they typically go through with every person. And I remember that my parents would have the missionaries come in to give me the discussions because they thought that like I just didn't understand. And the reality of the situation was I could not connect the dots between the God that they taught me about when I was a child and the God they were teaching me about is in like as a teenager.
Right.
To the point that I was hospitalized in an inpatient unit for suicide attempts at 11 years old. And I spent about a week in inpatient hospitalization and walked on the other side of it. And I will say it was a blessing because when you're in a circumstance and a situation where you're surrounded by other kids who are suicidal, it gives you a lot of perspective in your life. And there were kids that I was in this inpatient unit with who were schizophrenic, who had like early onset schizophrenia, and like the voices in their head were telling them to hurt people or hurt themselves.
Wow.
There was a 4-year-old that I was in this inpatient unit with who had made multiple suicide attempts because everyone in his life had killed themselves.
Wow.
And so I walked away from this inpatient stint with a tremendous amount of self-reflection, feeling like,
how old are you at this? Is this 11? Yeah, this is your 11. Yeah.
I was 11 years old when this was going on. So I walked out of this stint really feeling like my life is not so bad. I don't have justification for feeling the level of despair and self-hatred that I was feeling. And so I believe that that was the first time that I consciously gaslit myself into believing that I hadn't gone through enough to justify the level of brokenness. Right? So, and that attitude was absolutely supported by my parents. Like, I cannot explain to you the number of times over my entire lifespan where my parents have said things like, your life is not so bad. Why are you like this? And it was extremely, deeply, deeply damaging. And so difficult to kind of move about that space, having experienced so much of this trauma that I really didn't feel like I could talk about because sex wasn't discussed. What was discussed was very shame based, and I had already kind of entered in this space where I was way more sexualized than other kids my age, and that created like a domino effect of just massive fucking issues in my world. Um, and so I did this inpatient stint when I was 11 years old. And that kind of just started this insane passion of self-hatred that led to other circumstances where I had victimized other children around that same period of time. I think I was 12 years old, I think I was 10 years old. And again, this is like the early 90s, and I was a babysitter to these kids. And not like there wasn't like a molestation element on my end, but there was an education element on my end where I was educating kids that were 5, 6 years younger than me on topics that I had no business talking to these kids about, and like encouraging them to engage in behaviors that like children should not be engaging in at 6 years old. But it was so normalized for me that I didn't understand the depth of what I was doing in those circumstances and situations. So by the time I was rolling around at 11, 12 years old, and I'm starting to understand the impact of my behavior and the impact of like other children's behavior on me, I God, I fucking hated myself. I hated everything about myself. And I didn't grow up, the dynamic that I grew up in
Where's
with
your
my
sister at in all of this, like during this time? And was she, do you know, was she ever molested?
Yes. So I'm pretty sure that she dealt with that in childhood as well. My sister was raped when she was 15 years old. And so similar, if you can do the math, I was 12 and a half, 13 years old when Jenny was raped. And so there were just so many of these different elements, right? And Jenny is incredibly special to me because as my big little sister and growing up in the 80s and 90s, I had to be deeply protective of her because kids were not kind to kids with
Shit, they're not
disabilities.
kind still, but I get it. I'm
Yeah,
an 80s baby, so I gotcha.
yeah, yes. Like it just we had a different understanding of people with disabilities at that time. Like I literally remember my sister was brought into school for like my mom changed the education system in Utah to actually create special ed in our public school systems
Wow.
because my sister was so influenced by other children's behavior and the way that like they acted around her and her mirroring those behaviors that my mom was concerned that that her having Down syndrome and putting her in a school with other kids with disabilities, that children who were struggling with physical disabilities, mental disabilities that were more intense than her, that she was going to start emulating their behaviors. And what my mom wanted was for her to have the opportunity to emulate people's behaviors that were without disability. And so um, we I spent a tremendous amount of time in like my younger years defending her. Like I remember pushing kids into the deep end that were making fun of her, like at the public swimming pool.
Good for you, though. I'm sorry, but sometimes kids just need to get their ass whooped.
And this is like that happened throughout many like areas of my life where I just felt like I had to stick up for, defend Jenny, because people were just being cruel to her. And
so not only are you dealing with your own personal inner turmoil of the shit that you've gone through, but now you've also become a caretaker, almost a parent, because they were so concerned with the medical portion of what was going on with her, but you're concerned with the emotional as well. Like, hey, don't pick on my sister. The kids were mean. So you're dealing with both of these aspects all while you're still a child yourself.
Yes. And I, in a lot of ways, acted as her translator as well, because she didn't speak well and I could understand her in ways that other people couldn't. And so I have always kind of been in this space where I was taking care of Jen. And so there were a lot of like deep rooted attributes that she helped curate inside of me that I didn't understand until I was much older, because I was so bogged down with all of the other noise.
Now you had mentioned that you don't speak with your parents any longer. When did that happen?
The finalization of that happened just in the last month or so.
Oh shit.
Mm-hmm. But I have not had a relationship that was anything more than very surface level small talk with my parents for almost 15 years now.
And that's just because the difference of beliefs and everything you've probably gone through. I mean, it's got to be, obviously it's way more deeper, but I mean,
it is. Yeah, it's and we can kind of get into that as we move further down the line, but generally speaking, what ended up happening was I started kind of getting therapy for some of the issues that I was having. Mm-hmm. And my dad very casually one day it's just burned in my brain probably for the rest of my life. But my dad very casually told me that he had met someone that he had talked to about a diagnosis that I received. And again, we can kind of dive into that as we move further along in this story. And I remember my dad telling me that he had told this man that he had already given up on having any kind of meaningful relationship with me. And that was news to me.
Right.
At that point, because I was like probably 25, 26 years old. And he just so casually said, like, I already let him know, like, I've given up on the possibility of having a meaningful relationship with you. And it was so heartbreaking for me at that time that I was like, I need to let go of this relationship. Mm-hmm. I need to let go of the possibility of believing that I could have a relationship with my parents that I desperately wanted.
And how hard was that for you?
Oh, it broke my heart. It still to this day absolutely breaks my heart. The last month, the last incident that kind of occurred that was the straw that broke the camel's back with my parents, it still slams into me, right? Yeah. And I'm like 15 years into accepting that my parents cannot see me as the person that I am, and
accept you,
accepting the fact that I cannot have the familial relationship that I want to have with them. And it still slams into me. Like, that is the thing I don't know that I will ever fully get over, is wanting my parents' love and approval.
Well, that's a huge piece in the little girl that you are, because that little girl is still very alive and present in your life. We all have them. And it's one thing that I speak about often to, whether it's women come and see me in the boudoir suite or whether it's, at a speech what I'm talking about is that I have had to fight for years. Well, up until recently, what I call my little girl, and I named her Lulu because it was just easier for me to identify Lulu as like, she's the badass little girl that's going to like take her ball back and not want to play with you anymore if you push too hard or if things don't go her way. She was the resentful girl. She was the jealous girl. She was the mean girl. And as the woman that I am today, instead of shunning her and pretending that she didn't exist, I had to start figuring out, how do I love Lulu? Because when people didn't show up and love me, and I did come from a really good home, but my mom specifically was not emotionally available for me. She was a workaholic, and many of the attributes that I take to who I am now was because of that. I would say that I'm always now trying to love on that little girl. And I know that I have the power within me at any point to go back and hug on her and tell her it's going to be okay. And you still, no matter how much fucking healing we do, we still have that little girl inside of us.
We do. And it was what ended up happening after that hospital stint. I remember my parents gave me a journal to use while I was inpatient. And I remember walking out of or leaving the hospital and letting my parents know that I had a connection with higher power because of like journaling, like I know God, like God loves me, like all of these different things.
Mm-hmm.
And that began this incredibly toxic relationship with my parents where I received love, adoration, care, acceptance, kindness from them only when I believed in the church. Mm. So I went through this very chaotic struggle where I was really, really like deeply struggling with connecting the dots in the church, with making sense of the fact that they tell me like, God loves all of his children. He knows you.
But he doesn't love you.
Exactly. But if you do not acknowledge the church, if you shun the church, you will never have access to God in the afterlife. And that's what Mormons believe. They believe that you have to meet a certain number of metrics in order to actually access God.
Mm-hmm. You know what I say to that, and this is going to sound really shallow and whatnot, but it was Henry Ford that said, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. And in their mind, they may be right for them. And when they go off and then maybe they won't, you know what I mean? But that doesn't make it true for you. It does not make it true for anybody.
Right. And the thing that I really struggled with in that concept and that idea is I'm sitting here going, how can you tell me that God knows me, that God loves me and sees all of my struggles, but doesn't recognize that I'm a skeptical motherfucker. Yeah. And I need more information than your average, bear, so to speak. And so I really struggled with that, right? Where I would go up and down in this belief system where I'm like, okay, I can believe in the church. And then, shit, this doesn't make any sense to me. Mm-hmm. Or like, I can't conceptualize like how this is the truth. And now, obviously, I'm in a space where I don't agree with any of the church's teachings. I believe that it is it's gotten to it's unhealthy doctrine. I believe it is a very controlling doctrine, and is very, very damaging to a lot of people's psyches and self-worth. And I was actually just talking with a friend that I grew up with in childhood. And she's talking to me about how she is now traversing this self-esteem path right now. We're in our mid to late 30s, both of us, traversing this like self-esteem path where she is trying to heal from the damage that the church did pertaining to like her self-value and her self-worth. And I was just commending her for her bravery and pushing into that, because that's something that I had to do.
Well, there's guilt. Would you agree that there's also, because, I grew up in the Catholic Church and I really never could understand it. I couldn't understand why we had to talk to a priest and why we couldn't just go talk to God ourselves. And the very rigid teachings, and this is how you have to do it, and then just, I didn't get it. And when I left the church and I found Christianity for me, and even then, like, there's a lot of things that I struggle with, and why I say that is because I had a straight up conversation with God. And it was right after a neck surgery that I had. And I don't tell very, very many people this because I'm afraid of judgment, and I'm afraid of what they're going to say about the conversation that literally God and I had. But it was one of pure love and no judgment, and that we are all on our journey. We're all on a journey to, live the best life that we can, and to acknowledge yes, love one another. At the end of the day, that love is the greatest tool that you can bring to anybody without all the rules and regulations, and that we people had it wrong. Like, he basically told me, you guys got it wrong. Like, it's very, very wrong.
So I have to tell you that one of, so moving throughout this period, and there's like a lot more to get into in the timeline and all of that good stuff. But when I got to a place of self-healing, I also got to a place of living in kind of like an agnostic, like atheist state, right? Because I felt like religion had hurt me so deeply that I just could not connect with I could not connect religion with peace. And I read the most amazing book on Christianity that connected so many dots for me. And I have to tell you, because it was so profoundly brilliant. It's called Mary Magdalene Revealed. And it is essentially a novel from a Christian author who got so frustrated with modern day mainstream Christianity and the hate and bigotry that is oftentimes enwoven, like, in, Christianity in general. Yes. And she's sitting going like, this isn't me. This isn't Christ. Nope. This doesn't make sense to me. So she went on kind of like a research expedition, so to speak, to look for biblical texts, biblical time texts that were not included in the Bible, because there were prophets and disciples and all of these different people who wrote down their experiences with
their
Christ.
Journey, their experience, their words.
Same as all of the, books in the Bible were, and they just weren't included because the Nicene Creed had determined that that book was not going to be included in the Bible. And the Nicene Creed did their best to destroy any additional documentation and texts, but they didn't destroy everything. And what this book really talks about is how mainstream Christianity has bastardized teachings, and that specifically women were some of the most important disciples and prophets in Christ's church. And misogyny essentially led to a situation where they were excluded from the importance of his teachings. And it talks tremendously about the fact that Jesus was teaching about love over everything. And the first component of love was love for self. And that is the place that I've really journeyed through in my spiritual journey. When I got to a place of like tremendous amount of deconstruction and healing and engagement, I was led to understand the Christian mindset more, because when I started to love myself, I felt a connection with higher power that I had never been able to access previous to that. And alignment with
what age are you at this point?
I was 25 at this point. So basically, just kind of like driving it back down into the timeline previous to that, all of these different components that were playing an active role in like the way that I was growing up. The other piece is that the church really gives so much power to men that it creates a power dynamic in the familial relationships where control and abuse and like whether it's mental, emotional, etc., is extremely prominent. And my dad was very mentally and emotionally abusive to my mother, and very emotionally and mentally abusive to me, and was very abusive to my brothers in all aspects. So they received physical components of abuse from my dad as well. And so I had just like all of these different facets that kind of came together and curated a space where by the time I was in my late teens, I was in a space of rebellion, and I was a really good kid. Like I didn't start drinking until the summer between my like junior and senior year of high school. I lost my virginity just like a couple months before my 18th birthday. So I was always a pretty freaking good kid, but my parents always treated me like I was this massive problem, that I had these massive issues. And I was rejected love and security from my parents every single time I moved from a space where I was not immersed in church in a way that they found acceptable. And it led to circumstances where by the time I actually was having sex, I was using sex to hurt myself. I was using sex to punish myself and to justify all of the self-hatred that I had inside of me, because it was the only way that I could make sense of like how fucking angry and just dark it was inside my being. And that led to a series of additional circumstances, right? Like I ended up getting pregnant with my oldest child when I was 19 years old. And it was I got pregnant from a man that I had been dating like a relatively short period of time. And by the time that I realized I was pregnant, we had broken up. And that's its own like fucked up story, because I was not an active participant in getting pregnant. A condom was removed while we were having sex, and I was not privy to that information. And so I ended up pregnant. I was living in Utah at the time. I was living with my brother and his wife.
And was your brother, did he stay in the Mormon? Yeah. Okay.
Both of my brothers are still active in the church. I am the only one that has been the little black sheep that has moved away from the doctrine that the church teaches. So my whole family is still active. All like the majority of my cousins, my grandparents were active until the day that they died. Like my ancestors literally traveled from Europe to the Americas for Mormonism. So when I tell you, like, I am generations deep in this thing, and that this played just a huge part of the like construct of what made me. That's why, right? When I started struggling with the church, my grandma stopped allowing me to be her favorite. I always used to say that she would have a twinkle in her eye when she saw me. And moving into my teen years, my grandma's attitude toward me, like, about faced, just a total 180, and I was ostracized.
So I was just gonna say that, like, you used a different word, but I'm thinking about everything that you're saying, and although everybody was present in your life, you still were abandoned by the very people that are supposed to love you, take care of you, be there, keep you safe. You were basically abandoned.
Yep, I sure was. And I spent almost every night. So when I got pregnant, I was living in Utah. Planned Parenthood was not a thing in Utah, like didn't exist. And it was still a relatively small thing everywhere else in the country as well, because we were just this was like 2003, 2004. So we were just at this precipice where our country as a whole were having conversations about sex positivity and about sexual education and about all of these different things that just hadn't been present in the current time. And so I ended up pregnant, and the man who got me pregnant, his attitude toward the entire thing was, let me know how much money you need for the abortion. And
although he was the one that took off the condom. God.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was 9 years my senior. He was finishing up a doctorate program, and I was a baby. So he was 28 years old when I was 19, and it just, yeah, it was a gross abuse of power. And he really liked me. Like, that is one thing that I remember during that time. And so when I ended up pregnant and uh, basically told him, what ended up happening was my second cousin was with me when I found out that I was pregnant. And my parents ended up finding out. And they basically told me that I am going to have this baby, or I am no longer going to have a family. Mm. And so they asked me to move home, and I moved home, and I spent almost every night of my pregnancy being sat down by my father, who was telling me that I needed to give my baby up for adoption because I had ruined my life. No man would ever want me. I've ruined my opportunities to have like a good Mormon partner. And like, how could I do this to myself, essentially? Mm-hmm. So almost every night of my pregnancy, I was belittled and made to feel like I was just this worthless human being. And the only opportunity that I had for redemption was to give my cousin, who was struggling with infertility issues, my baby.
Wow.
And by the time that I got to that place, I had vehemently decided that I was keeping this baby. If this was happening, like, I was going to be a mom. Mm-hmm. And it's important to note that I had spent my entire life being told that my worth was attributed to motherhood. And so even though this was happening in a way that, like, I hadn't planned and I hadn't expected, I was following the course that I was supposed to take, right?
And I was going to say, in that, did you ever feel a sense of, okay, now I'm going to be worthy? Like, if for yourself or even for them, I guess.
Mm-mm. Nope. The only time that I think that that's the point that I started settling into the idea that I was never going to be worthy. And I ended up having my baby. And I met my ex-husband when my oldest was 3 months old. Mm-hmm. And I latched on to the very first man who seemed to accept the fact that I had a child. And that was a deeply toxic relationship right from the get-go. But I was so desperate
for love
to have someone love me, mm-hmm. and accept the fact that I had created this tiny little human being that filled my heart with wonder and awe, that I was just like, okay, this is where we're at with this. And that started a situation where I was emotionally, mentally, and eventually physically abused through the totality of that marriage.
Wow.
To the point that I ended up I had my second child in that marriage. And we tried literally one time, decided it was a bad idea for us to try and have a baby. And then I found out I was pregnant. Shit. And moved. We moved to do like door-to-door sales.
You were still in Utah at this time?
No. Okay. So here's the timeline of events in terms of like where I moved. So we lived in Utah until I was 6 years old. And then my dad's job moved us around from Ohio for 3 years to Missouri for another 2 years, and then eventually to Oregon. In Oregon, we moved there when I was 11. So that's where like all of the drama took place. I was seeing therapists at that time for separation anxiety. I was being tested for ADHD. I had my IQ tested. During that whole process, like there was just a lot that my parents were trying to do for me because they noticed that I had gotten into this space where I was really messed up, but there was zero accountability from them that they would have played a role in what I had become. So we spent 6 years just outside of Portland, Oregon, and that's what I consider home is Portland. And then at the end of my junior year of high school, we moved down to Sacramento, California, which is where I've lived since then.
Okay.
So, or rather, that's where I lived, and then I jumped back down to Utah after high school and lived there for maybe like 3 or 4 months before I ended up pregnant and moved back with my parents to Sacramento. So at that point in time, I was living in Sacramento with my ex-husband. We moved back up to Portland for a summer in 2008. I was very, very pregnant, and my husband at the time was doing door-to-door sales, which is kind of a normal thing for Mormon men. Like there's a lot of companies in Utah that have kind of.
And he was a Mormon man?
Oh yeah. Yeah. My husband grew up Mormon as well, but is not straight. And because of that, grew up with just a tremendous amount of self-loathing himself. And I have to say, as deeply abusive as our relationship was, I have compassion for him at this point in my life. He's gone through a massive healing journey himself, but he was struggling with his own just deep, deep, profound self-hatred because of his sexuality.
Yeah.
And the church is not okay with anything other than being straight in the church. And up until probably 2010 or so, they believed that sexuality was a choice. They didn't even believe that it was something that you were born with, right? And it went through like there was a like Born This Way kind of major campaign that took place within the Mormon church, kind of surrounding the time where same-sex marriage legalization was taking place in California, which the church took a massive stance against and put so much money toward the trying to ensure that like gay marriage was not legalized in California. And that was all happening kind of at the same time as we were living in Oregon. So what actually happened during that period of time is my husband was supposed to be doing door-to-door sales, and I found out later on he was going to a bar all day and just fucking around and sleeping with other people and doing drugs. And I was maintaining the office management for that, for those field operations. I was their field manager. And so my salary was supporting our entire life because he was making no commissions because he was working.
Right.
And so he was just on his own thing, doing his own thing, and just deeply, deeply emotionally, verbally abusive toward me during the totality of that pregnancy. And when my daughter was born, we moved back down to Sacramento, literally, I think like 7 to 10 days before I gave birth to our daughter. And my ex-husband left me when she was 2 weeks old. And so I went through now 2 children, like raising basically a newborn, by myself.
Mm-hmm.
I was living with my parents at the time. My parents have always provided me um, housing and monetary support when I needed it in those different kind of structures. And I'm so grateful to them for that, because I would have been in a really, really difficult place. But there was so much. And I get very, very bad postpartum depression with every single one of my babies.
How many kiddos do you have,
I
Andrea?
have three.
Okay.
I have three, and all three of my kids have different fathers. So you can kind of get an idea of like the chaos that was surrounded parenting in general for me.
And trying to
So
figure out your own way to parent these kids with all the turmoil and the shit that because that's what I always tell my kids, is that we as parents, we always want to do better than what was, done for us. And so sometimes we even go a little excessive on trying to do better, that then we can mess up our kids as well, because they become spoiled little shit sometimes or whatever.
yeah,
But
and that is absolutely the case. But in this situation, like Caden, my oldest, he was around all of the abuse, right? It's not that these situations would happen directly in front of him, but we would get into these situations where my ex-husband would drink and gamble and come home just toasted and throw me against walls, or threaten to wake Caden up, or just enter into these scenarios where he's getting physically abusive with me, or yelling in the house, and would use Caden against me, because I wouldn't want, these things to affect him. And it did, like, it caused massive issues that I'm now seeing in my 17-year-old child, where he has really, really deep abandonment issues, because at 2 and 3 years old, he was learning that it didn't matter what his feelings were if he was scared, or in this place where he didn't know what was happening. He had to sort through those emotions on his own. And I think it caused, major psychological issues for him that I'm now witnessing as a healed human being in latter years. And it breaks my heart, because nothing I can do about it now. I can only wait for him to be ready to engage with healing practices that will help him kind of unwind that damage. The only thing that I can do for him now is show up and make sure that he understands the importance of, like, my love being unconditional, and giving him space to become ready on his own to go through this healing journey. But it's a waiting game for me at this point, because no amount of therapy that we did when he was younger had the ability to touch on these massive discrepancies that he created when he was 3 years old, 2.5 years old, where his brain's building blocks are basically putting together these ideas of what is safe and what is not. And it's been so hard as a healed human to go and to look at the way that these things have impacted my children. Like the damage in my life has impacted my children, that I know that they are going to have to work through in adulthood in order to access the space that I've been able to reach through my own healing journey. And so I was in this, deeply abusive relationship with my ex-husband, where he is dealing with a tremendous amount of addiction on his end, a tremendous amount of self-loathing on his end, that just created abysmal circumstances for me and my children. And we actually left that marriage 7 times before it stuck. We separated and got back together over and over and over again. And that's actually a statistic that most women are incapable of actually leaving abuse until the 7th time. And for me, What prompted that was Jenny dying. And this is where I'm going to get emotional because I can't talk about Jenny without crying. So this was in 2010, and I had my daughter was born in 2008, in August 2008, and I believe that my ex-husband and I got back together for the last time in October of 2009. We went a little over a year because I needed to feel that I was that he had made progress in the issues that he had before I went back into that relationship. And so he was telling me that he was getting therapy. What I ended up finding out after the fact is that he would disappear for an hour at a time to go sit under a tree and think about what he'd done, not actually getting any real help. And so what happened was we had gotten back together. We actually bought a house together. And that was like his, you know, we weren't going to have another baby, but let's buy a house to try and fix the marriage type of situation, right? And so we had bought a house together, and the period of time when we were living in the house was the greatest abuse that I ever withstood from him. And it didn't look like regular abuse because I wasn't walking out of the house with like black eyes and all of that kind of stuff. He was intentional about hitting me in my head, in my hairline.
Wow.
And so I would get knocked around and nobody would be able to see the bruises. Nobody was able to understand the abuse that I was withstanding at that point. And there had been a number of different incidents where I just got to a place where I was broken in that house, and I subjected myself to the abuse and felt like I had just gotten to a place where I was fucked up and I needed, and the sooner that I could accept the fact that I am just a fucked up human being and accepting that that is who I am, that I could get to a place of greater peace, right? But I had also determined that I had made my bed and I needed to lay in it because my ex-husband had convinced me that I had two kids by two different dads, that I was trashy, that nobody was going to want me if I walked away from that relationship. And at 23, 24 years old, that's a really hard thing to subject yourself to. Like the idea of like, yeah, I might have to be alone for the rest of my life with and be a single mom with these kids. And these were just the stories that were presented to me and told to me. And Jenny had struggled with health issues her entire life. She actually wasn't supposed to live past 2 years old. She had heart defects, which is a common thing in kids with Down syndrome to have different heart surgeries and all of that kind of stuff. So Jenny was born with a hole in her heart. She had an operation when she was 8 years old to kind of umbrella that hole, and for whatever reason, when she was a baby and she wasn't supposed to live past 2, the issues that were kind of prominent in preventing her from being able to live a long, happy life just disappeared. They couldn't explain it. They considered it a medical miracle. They didn't know why it was going on. But all of a sudden, she just wasn't dealing with these issues in the same way. And they were able to kind of like mitigate the ongoing issues via a surgery when she was 8 years old again. And otherwise, we just dealt with like the norm of having a family member with Down syndrome. What ended up happening, however, was between like probably 2008 and 2010, when my sister passed away, we started noticing that Jenny was getting really tired when she was walking. Like she would do the stairs in the house from the first floor to the second floor, and she would have to stop at the top of the stairs and like sit down on the couch up there and catch her breath. And so my mom recognized that there were health issues, and she battled with insurance for just a long time to try and see if we could have something done, exploratory surgery done to figure out like what the heck is going on with Jenny. And so this was May of 2010. And I am in this marriage and in this relationship that is awful and terrible. And my mom is fighting with insurance. And finally, we get approval for Jenny to have this exploratory surgery where they basically send a scope up her femoral artery, and they go and take a look at like what's going on in her heart, what's going on in her lungs, etc. And what happened during that period of time is Jenny went in for exploratory surgery, and they let us know that she was dealing with congestive heart failure and pulmonary hypertension because her heart was failing because it could not get enough oxygen into the blood, which was preventing appropriate blood flow from the heart, which was subsequently causing her lungs to not work properly so that it could oxygenate the blood. So the two organs were really fighting against each other, and neither one was working for one another. And that wasn't like, that was treatable at that point, right? They're like, okay, she has pulmonary hypertension, she has congestive heart failure, this is what we're dealing with, we're going to put her on Cialis or Viagra or something like that, which is actually what those medications were intended for, was to help curate additional blood flow in the body. They just found out that like a side effect was that it would give like dudes woodies, right? And so that was the expectation after the surgery, is that Jenny would go on to like a medication like this, and she would have to be on a medication like this to help her blood flow and her oxygen flow more. And the day after we got notification of her needing to be on this medication, they're like, "Ooh, this is, I think, worse than what we thought it was. We're going to put her on an intravenous medication where she wears a pump the rest of her life. And this medication is just pumped into her 24/7, because if for whatever reason the drip stopped, she would have about an hour's time before her heart failed."
Wow.
And that was like a super intense piece of information for us to receive from the doctors, because we're like, holy shit, like this is bigger than we thought. This is more expansive than we thought. Like this is a big deal. And so at that point, we're like, okay, you know, Jen's on intravenous medication the rest of her life. We are dealing with pumps. We're dealing with, you know, incision sites to make sure that like all of these things are going about and working through, etc. Jenny still hadn't really woken up from this original exploratory surgery at this point. And they're telling us, nope, that's totally normal. Like this was a lot for her body to go through, especially because of the congestive heart failure, pulmonary hypertension, etc. We're just going to give her more opportunity to rest. Well, the day after we were told that she would be having constant intravenous medication, they told us that she would have constant intravenous medication, but we were probably lucky to get 2 years left from her. And that was like a Mack truck slamming into us, because Jenny was such an integral part of all of our lives. Like my mom had spent, I mean, our entire lifetime. At this point, Jenny is 27 years old and has been living with my parents her entire life. She's written into the will in terms of like which one of the siblings would take her in the event that like something happened to my parents and my parents could no longer take care of her. Like we had worked through all of these scenarios where we were taking on sibling responsibility of caretaking her for the rest of her life. We never wanted her to have to move into a home. We never wanted to have to create a situation where she was not being cared for by family. And that is what we had all expected, was one of us was going to take care of Jenny after my parents had died. And so that's where we were all at in terms of like the expectation of Jenny's lifespan. And so the day after we got news that she was going to have intravenous medication and we may only have 2 years for her, we were told that we were going to probably have closer to 6 months with her. And that timeline shortened and shortened. And on the 7th day that Jenny was in the hospital, we turned off the machines and unplugged her because the only thing that was sustaining her life was medication and ventilation. And she woke up for maybe 48 hours during that period of time. And she was so scared. And so we were just really focused on loving her. And trying to give her reassurance and understanding. And one of the last things that she told my mom was that grandma, who my grandparents had all passed away by that point, grandma was with her.
Wow.
And why is grandma here?
Wow.
So that was kind of one of the last things that she had expressed to us. And then she went into a coma. And that was about, I think, at the 3-day mark, maybe the 4th day. And so we spent another few days trying to determine whether or not we were going to be able to get her back. And just day by day, she wasn't recovering. She wasn't getting better. The only thing that was keeping her alive at the end was the medication that they had her on, and they didn't think that her lungs would be able to support themselves if they were to actually turn off the ventilation. And so we made a decision as a family on the 7th day to go ahead and let her go. And we were all there and around while she flatlined, just kind of loving her and holding her through that space. And it had a deep impact on me because I had never imagined life without her, right? Like, I imagined life with her without my parents before I had ever gone to a place where I was thinking that I was going to have to live without Jenny.
Right.
And so it hit me deeply. And it this was the end of May 29th, 2010. And I got to a place after Jenny died where I looked around and I looked at the life that I was living with my ex-husband and the abuse that I was living in, and believing that I had made my bed and I had to lay in it. And I looked around and I said, what the fuck am I doing? Why have I chosen this? Life is too short to be so unhappy. And so in October of that same year, I separated from my ex-husband. And it just created this vacuum for me to start getting really introspective on the way that my life had played out up until this point.
So Jenny saved you.
Jenny saved me, and I think it was her last gift to me. Jenny, actually, her second to last gift to me, because I met my current husband in December of 2010. And I was spiraling at that point, right? Like I was in like a full on hoe phase because I had just spent the last 4 years being locked in a relationship that was not only deeply abusive to me, but that I was being, like my ex-husband will admit to cheating on me with probably 15 different people during that 4 years that we're together, which means that it's probably double that amount of people, right? And I knew a lot of what was going on because there were circumstances where he was cheating on me with mutual friends of ours, and I'm finding out about it. And he's cheating on me after he leaves me when Brooklyn's born, my second child, and living with his buddy, and who was single, and just having like all of the fucking like girls in and out of the guys' house, and like interacting and engaging with all of them. And so I was at this point where I had told Adam, my ex-husband, that I was in this space and in this stage where he had to pulverize my heart in order for me to stop loving him. And that's the toxicity of a of an abusive relationship, is you love this person deeply, the point where you are desperate for them to change themselves to become a healthier version for your relationship.
Right.
And I realized at some point along the lines that just wasn't going to happen. And one of the greatest lessons that I learned during that process, because I went and got myself in domestic violence therapy in order to like leave all of this. We had just a conversation, or I had gone to an organization kind of similar to Weave, for women who are trying to leave abusive situations. Because I had been pulled back into it so many times, and I didn't want to do that this time. Like this time felt different for me. So I ended up in therapy, DV therapy, where I was being asked a lot of questions about my childhood and my relationship with my father, and why are you not emotional about this abuse that you're talking about, and kind of getting into this place where I learned, and the greatest lesson that I learned from that 18 months of like domestic violence therapy that I attended initially out of this relationship, was that I cannot change people. I have zero power over influencing someone else to show up in the relationship that I'm in with them. And the only thing that I had power over was how I reacted.
Right.
So I meet my current husband in December while I'm in this hoe phase, and my husband and I connected because his wife died 2 months before Jenny did.
Wow.
And we connected in grief and became unbelievable friends and an incredible support system for one another. But I had a whole fucking roster at this point, right? Like I had like 4 guys that everybody knew about everybody. And I was just of the attitude that like, you know where I'm at, you know what I'm doing. If you're not happy with it, you can like opt out at any point. Like this is where I am. And so I went on, a couple initial dates with my husband. And on our second date, we were, sorry about that.
Okay.
I had a notification pop up. And on our second date, we were in the shower together after spending the night together. And he told me that he was falling in love with me. And I went, whoa, buddy.
Too fast.
Welcome to the friend zone. And that's what I ended up doing. I friended that motherfucker and basically said, okay, like, you obviously can't do casuals. I'm not going to do casual more, but like, I also really appreciate your friendship and your love. So we will go ahead and just assume that we're going to move into this space where we are friendly with one another. And that's what ended up happening. So from December until March or so, we were just amazing support systems for one another, talked constantly, and just helped each other work through a tremendous amount of grief while I'm simultaneously going through this therapeutic process, DV therapy, while I'm trying to get myself worked out, etc.
Right.
So in March of 2011, March is when his wife passed away. And so Justin's my husband. Justin decided that he was going to take a mission trip to Costa Rica over the anniversary of her passing. So he had planned to spend a month in Costa Rica. The first couple weeks, he was going to go work at a local orphanage there, kind of just surround himself with kids and serve. And then the second half of the trip, he was going to go save the turtles. So he was going to basically help all of the little baby turtles that are hatching on the earth make it to the ocean.
I mean, how could you not fall in love with this guy?
How can you not fall in love with a man like this? You're going to go save the turtles?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So what ended up happening was it took me about a week after him leaving. And I will tell you that he had every single intention of never talking to me after this. He went to Costa Rica with the intention of disconnecting from me because it was breaking his heart. He was firmly in love with me at that point in time, but he's still watching me date other people.
And you're still in this healing process, but you're still kind of destroying your life. I mean, hindsight 2020, when we're in relationships like that, we're still experiencing punishment to ourselves. And even though we think we're, I'm going to fucking rebel and who cares? And, I'm going to live my life and YOLO, we're really just hurting ourselves. And he's probably witnessing this.
Yeah. And I'm sitting there spiraling, just circling the toilet at this point. And so it took me about a week for me to realize that I really did not like doing life without Justin in it. And I remember emailing him and just letting him know, I don't like this.
Yeah.
This is comfortable to me. You are supposed to be in my life. And he actually ended up coming home a week and a half early from that trip. And that was game, set, match for us. We basically were inseparable.
So you were his little turtle. You were the actual little turtle that he saved.
Maybe not all the baby turtles were saved, but this baby turtle.
That's right. Saved. That's right.
And probably I want to say, gosh, maybe 9 or so months into dating, I was seeking additional therapeutic services, right? And have started moving towards topping out with this therapist that I was seeing for domestic violence. And I was looking to get on medication because I was in a rough spot still. And so I went into a psychiatrist to get diagnosed with depression again, because I had been diagnosed with anxiety and depression basically all throughout my entire life. And I was sitting down with this psychiatrist, and she started asking me pointed questions about the circumstances in my life. Do you feel like you have to leave people before they leave you? Do you feel like you have to strum up drama in the event that things start getting too calm?
Self-sabotage, yeah.
Yeah, and so she's talking to me about all of these different factors, and every question that she's asking me, I feel like someone is finally seeing me, right? She's literally putting words to the idea that I am my concept that I was just fucked up, right? By definition, I am just a fucked up human being. And then she tells me that all of these characteristics are indicative of borderline personality disorder. And she diagnosed me with borderline personality disorder. And there is a specific therapy that is used to treat people with this specific type of personality disorder, because personality disorders are not, they're not things like bipolar, where you have like a imbalance in your brain, or depression, your brain is like misfiring and you have like a lack of, you know, the hormones that you need in order to like be in this happy space, etc. Personality disorders are developed from trauma, or from different circumstances that kind of just steep your brain in this ideology. And so I remember being diagnosed and just sobbing in her office because I asked her, can I fix this? And she said, well, I have to let you know that patients with BPD don't typically have the ability to correct these issues for themselves. In theory, it is possible. There is a specific type of therapy. It's called dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT for short, that has been designed for people with borderline personality disorder, but it is tremendously difficult to get to a place of recovery within your personality disorder, because BPD is essentially an addiction to chaos.
Wow.
Where you do not allow yourself to enter into a peaceful place because you are so accustomed to feeling in turmoil that that's the comfortable spot for you.
Wow.
Is being in a place of complete and total turmoil.
That just, you know, you saying that in itself just like brings to light for me so many, and I'm not trying to diagnose people in my, you know, but you start to understand like, wow, because there's just certain circumstances around people that it's like, I think you strive in this, like you just do really well in this. And why? Because of so much trauma.
Yes. Yep. But she told me that while it's not common, it's possible. And that's all I needed to know.
Yep.
Right? Because I did not want to be the person that I was for my children.
Yeah.
Because I already watched how impactful it was on my babies to be in a place of chaos. So had this man that I was falling deeply in love with, or had fallen deeply in love with, I guess, at this point. And I was watching how my issues were affecting this relationship with this man. And so I decided, like, I am not going to be the one that is incapable of healing from this.
Speak, girl.
Sign me up for everything that I could possibly sign up for. I am going to dive in and I am going to do the hard work.
You decide, you made a decision. You made a decision. And that right there for me is just key in anything that somebody's going through, is that you made a decision that this is it. It stops with me. I'm going to do this. And nobody can want it for you. You have to want it for yourself. He couldn't have wanted it for you. You saw what was happening with the relationships, but you needed to want it for yourself.
Correct. And that is like literally the most important, the most important factor from borderline personality disorder, because it is deeply uncomfortable to learn the tools that are required to move past impulsivity, to move past self-destruction, to move past this place where you are deflecting responsibility for the pain that you are curating in other people's lives. Because simultaneously, like, healing does not happen on the same plane of existence as hatred.
Say that again. Say that one more time.
Healing does not happen on the same plane of existence of hatred. And so
drop a motherfucking dime on that one.
You are incapable of healing yourself while simultaneously hating yourself.
Wow.
And
Wow.
it's cyclical, right? When you're moving in patterns of self-hatred, you're consistently keeping yourself submerged in the toxicity that is curating those issues for you in the first place.
And that's environment, that's people, that's the surroundings you put yourself in, but you put yourself in them because it feels that chaos is just
Correct.
feels good, I guess.
Correct.
Wow.
I went through the DBT program that I went to was a group program where I would attend every Wednesday 5 hours of group therapy, where we were taught tools and recognition of emotions and learning how to essentially put a door in between our feelings and our actions, make a determination on whether or not we let that door open or whether we keep that door closed.
Yes.
I went through this program and learned a tremendous amount, and this program was a year long. And about at the 10th month mark, I had this wildly profound epiphany that changed everything for me. And it seems like the most simplistic of concepts, but I felt for myself for the very first time compassion for how I ended up fucked up, because I had been gaslit by myself and by my family my entire life to believe that I hadn't gone through enough to justify getting to a place where I was so broken. And at that point in time, I felt compassion for myself for the first time where I said, no, if anyone had gone through the set of circumstances that I had that led up to this point in my life, they could very easily have ended up as broken as I was. And that I didn't have responsibility for the things that had played up until this point,
Right.
because my brain was built on trauma, but that now that I had entered in this space of understanding, it was now my responsibility to choose how I moved forward on a go forward basis. And I decided that I was going to choose to have compassion and love for myself. And in that, I all of a sudden was able to start talking to myself differently. And
telling yourself a different story.
And the things that I taught myself and the things that I focused on when I hated everything about me were 3 things that I liked about myself. And they were the 3 things that Jenny gave me. That I am kind, that I choose to show up with kindness to basically everyone in the world, that I chose to. I actually had a therapist at one point after I had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder that told me that she felt like I had been misdiagnosed because I was too kind. Because it is common for people with BPD to be really harsh, to have an extremely sharp tongue. And that wasn't something that would happen to me on a frequent basis. I opted for kindness in most circumstances. And so I focused on my kindness. I focused on my ability to have compassion for people and to choose to not judge them without having a really good understanding of their story.
Yes.
Right? Because different people have so many different reasons why they have become who they are. And that's so difficult to kind of integrate into what you're choosing to believe about people.
Everything that you're saying right now is difficult, no matter if you've been in trauma or not. In a general basis, the kind of people that we are, it's 100% being vulnerable and transparent. Those things are difficult and hard for anybody. Like, when you have to show up and be kind when somebody's not being so kind to you, or they're not, you know what I mean? And you have to show up with compassion and really see, okay, what's my part in this, or all of those things are difficult regardless of trauma. And so I commend you, number one, like that's what you're saying, like that, to be able to show up like that and to fight. Okay. Even when you talked about being autistic, that some of these things didn't come natural for you. Some of the empathy, emotions didn't come natural like that. I commend you for that. That's huge, because golly, I'm still struggling many times with, when I need to show up and be kind and not, and not, I have to hold my tongue back, or I have to, and I fail.
Yep. And I had those three things in my arsenal and in my toolbox because they were so inherent to me, because of just the way that I had to interact with Jenny. And so I really felt like she gave me these three things that I could like about myself when I hated everything about myself, so that I could not focus on all of the ways that I hated myself, so that I could focus my self-talk surrounding, you are kind, you are compassionate, you don't judge people for the way that their lives have played out.
But you also have boundaries.
I don't know that I did at that point.
Well, I'm saying now you do. Now you have boundaries. Being all of those three things, you can be those three things, but you still have got to have boundaries in your life. You still have got to say, okay, I can be as kind as and compassionate and loving and show up for you, but there's got to be boundaries at points, especially being in a toxic environment for so long and recognizing, okay, this is probably not going to be great.
No, you're exactly correct. And so I would say that boundaries, and this is like a lesson that I have learned since this time, because all of this is happening between the years between like 24 and 27 years old, right? Where I'm going through like 3 years, 2.5 years of this very, very intensive therapy throughout my world, where and then like on a go forward basis, that is where I really learned to understand that one of the most important things that you can do is protect your peace once you have received peace.
Yes, girl. Yes. All day to that.
Yep. And so I was able to focus on the things that I liked about myself while I moved into a healing space and started healing the things that I didn't like about myself, changing the way that I interact with the world, with circumstances, with situations, things that would curate spaces for me to dislike myself, having compassion for myself when I fucked up.
Yes. It's all I'm listening to you, and I'm sorry, but like what you're saying too, going back, and again, I said I didn't want to go there, but it's so much stuff has connected the dots for me in your story, and so many things that I could see would even be a trigger for you at even being in the camp. Even I keep looking over here because you're closer to me this way, so I feel more connected. You're on my computer screen over there. You're on my TV screen, so I just keep looking at you this way because you're closer to me. But some of these things make sense. Because we can still be triggered, right? We can still be triggered. Things that people say, do, or we feel, we can be triggered.
Yeah. And so what I learned during this entire process is this. I got to a place of tremendous peace with myself, right? And it's taken a long time. I'm 37 years. I feel like I mostly got to a place where I was good with the human being that I had become probably by the 29, 30 years old. And it's really just been kind of sinking into this bath of self-acceptance. But one of the things that I recognize in understanding boundaries is that I'm not everyone's cup of tea, and that's okay. It's not my business whether someone chooses to like me or not like me. I am a really big personality. I'm really, really quirky. When you are in kind of like friendly situations with me. I make noises, like I talk in different voices. I'll like, do really silly things because these are just personality quirks of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's people's jam and sometimes it's not. But in the curation of boundaries for me, I don't interact with people who I am not their cup of tea.
Sure.
I choose not to surround myself in those types of situations because I don't need anyone trying to convince me that I am hard to love.
Yeah,
And
you don't need anybody to convince you of what you're already convinced about, and that is loving yourself and self-accepting. So you don't need anybody else's opinion. I love that.
Yep. And so in that particular situation, in the camp situation, I caught vibes that I was not someone's favorite person, and so that caused me to maybe
Shrink.
get
It makes us shrink a little bit or walk away or just kind of like, okay, it can trigger us. I mean, if we're being 100%, it can trigger even, I can be in the healthiest places of places and still that little girl can sometimes be bothered. But you said you kind of like, okay, I'm going to remove myself from the situation, which is the best absolute thing that I think that you can do. Hindsight 2020, maybe it, I don't know, but I get you. I got it.
Yeah. So basically, there was just and I don't know that like that didn't happen because opinions were already established, etc. But generally speaking, in this particular situation pertaining to camp, we were. Sorry, I'm gonna have to go get a charger here in just a second. But in this particular situation with camp, there were just a number of different things, components that came into play, right? It was the week leading up to my sister's death, and that was a very emotional space for me. And I never know. We're 13 years deep at this point.
Right.
I never know. I call I liken grief to the ocean, right? And sometimes the water is glassy and it is clear and you're just floating along and everything feels really good, but all of a sudden like there's a black cloud on the horizon and you're being swallowed up by 30-foot waves. And you never know when it's going to hit.
Sure.
Right? It's unpredictable as a storm on the ocean can be, in the sense that like sometimes all of a sudden you're just whipped up and being like borderline drowning in grief and you don't even know where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
And it's much more the waters are much choppier in the beginning, and then subsequent years sometimes it's glass. Like sometimes there have been years where I have lovingly honored Jenny and that's the most that I needed to do. And there are years where grief just slams into me. And I just look at the world around me and I'm like, it's so fucking unfair that I don't get to have my sister.
Yeah.
Because this wasn't the life that I had expected, right? Yeah. One where she isn't involved. And what people don't understand who haven't experienced death of a close loved one is when someone you love deeply dies, you enter a new reality.
Mm-hmm.
You're in a whole different plane of existence.
Overnight.
Different world.
Yeah.
Literally overnight, where the world was one thing before and now it's completely something different.
Yes.
And that can be really, really hard to adjust to.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it just slams into me. And that was the situation. So it was a culmination of a few different factors that just made me feel like, okay, I can lovingly accept that maybe I'm not this particular person's cup of tea, but I'm not also going to push myself into that space and try and make people like me because I'm past that.
Yeah.
I'm so secure in myself and knowing who I am as an individual that if someone opts into not enjoying me as a person, I respect that
Yeah,
I
you've
respect
come into the area, and somebody had once said that basically you'll walk into a room with 100 different people, and 100 different people will have a different opinion of you. And there's
Yep.
nothing you can do to change it. Like, that's their opinion. Maybe there is something you can do to change it. But at the end of the day, why try to have, okay, well, for you, I'm going to be this, and for you, not when you're secure with yourself, and not when you have done the work to heal yourself and be better.
And I had spent my entire life changing who I was to try to fit in.
Yeah.
Because I had autism and I was the weird kid, I was left out. And so I spent my entire childhood watching other kids' behavior and assimilating to their version of what acceptable was in an effort to fit in.
Well, not,
And
and I think even just that makes sense when you say like how important inclusivity is to you, like why it is so important to you because of all the different circumstances that you've been a part of. That's why it also, hurts you to understand that somebody was feeling this way or a few people were feeling this way, that because you've always, and I know 100%, and we know in the boudoir industry that it is about being inclusive. It's about accepting everyone and any just as they are and as they come. And so I could see how that would be, like, wow, okay, I didn't know that I was projecting that.
well, and not only that, but like when I started hearing specific instances of people's experiences, I'm sitting here looking at like the grand scheme of things going, yeah, I can absolutely understand
Right.
why these things were interpreted as I don't care about you. I
Right.
don't get to know you. You don't matter to me. But that's so far from my core values that it just, I'm like sitting here going, wow, I messed up so deeply to genuinely make people feel these feelings. I recognize I did
Sure.
make them feel feelings. There were actions that I engaged in that made them feel these things because of a number of different factors that were going on in my
Sure.
life and the way that I was reacting to those outside
Sure.
contributors that led me to um, curate these feelings in others. And it broke my heart because I did make people that feel those things. That is something I did genuinely do.
But I think the
And
important part of this too, Andrea, is that you recognize it, because there's so many, and I think it was Chris, who I love Chris to death, said that you're so self-aware. You know what I mean? And you are, but at the same time, there's so many people that are not self-aware to recognize and say, hey. Hey, nope, that's your guys' problem. That, you know what I mean? Like, if you didn't feel that way, but no, you were like, let me reflect on this, let me process this, let me figure out how I needed to show up, and you accept that, which is God, like, you are a human being at the end of the day, and I'm glad you went and said what you did, and I'm. It's a tough situation all the way around. It really, really is a tough situation all the way around. But I'm glad that you also met it right there at the front gate. You took your time. And another thing I think that people expect is that, hey, I just need to respond right now. I just need to respond. It's like some people need time to process this. Some people, especially with what you were going through on top of that, and let me just sit with this for a while and see what my part was in this. Let me just think about this for a little while before I show up and say anything. And I respect you for that so much.
and that was an important piece for me because I didn't want anyone to get the impression that I was hearing what they were saying and I was reacting to being misunderstood.
Right, being the victim, or I'm going to play the victim part in this. Yes, I heard, and I could see that. I could feel that right away. It was like, no, you really wanted to accept your part.
I wanted to accept my part and I wanted to let them know that I learned from this
Yes.
because ultimately bad experiences that take place in our lives can do one of two things. They can either derail us or they can create an opportunity for growth. And
Yes.
I use in my life to take every difficult circumstance that comes into my world and to get curious about it. And
Yeah.
I think that there's a huge difference. So thinking about all of these different things that played out during this week, there is a difference between curiosity and rumination, right? And you live in the space where you're like, man, like thinking it over and over and over again, playing out the trauma in your head, playing out the things that are happening, wishing you had done things different, etc. Whereas when you approach something with curiosity, where you're not just cycling, the intention is very different, right? And the intention is to kind of live in this space and to relive it. Whereas moving into a place of curiosity, the intention is, how can I show up different?
Right.
And
if it's not here at this moment, then it's going to be in the next. You know what I mean? I'm going to take something from this. I'm going to grow from it. I'm going to learn from it. And I'm going to implement what I've learned in that.
Yes, absolutely. And I wanted to make sure that what I was articulating to the community in this situation is that people can simultaneously make mistakes, and mistakes were absolutely made, but that in those mistakes, you're still dealing with humans, and those humans have the ability to grow from these situations. And I make sure that people knew that my intention with every bad review that I have, that I ever get, is an opportunity of growth for me. It is not going to be something that I am going to ruminate on. It is something that I am going to get curious about, so that I can ensure that on a go forward basis, I am showing up in a way that is going to promote who I want to be in that future.
Yes. I love all of that. I have some questions for you. I know you said your phone is going to die. I have some questions for you. And yes, go ahead. What a powerful, I think just in general, what a powerful podcast. I think that you were right. You were right. It was twisted. But you know what? I love the reason why I do this podcast is because I love the twisted. I love with that being said, I also love the growth and the twisted, because I've come from, places in my own healing and my own trauma, my own shit, that I have done the work as well. And I love to get to know people by their shit, because I think it's at a moment where we feel like, okay, you know what? I'm just as fucked up as you. I can say that wholeheartedly. I am. And yet we're doing the work. That's the difference between a lot of people as well, is that they'll be aware and accept that there's work to be done. So these are kind of spitfire questions, okay? And I really want you to just, try to give me one word, okay? So my first question is, I will no longer tolerate.
Probably disrespect of my boundaries.
Good. Being average will.
Hinder my growth.
The way to get out of your own way is?
Heal.
My favorite self-practices.
Affirmations.
Being a leader means?
Owning up to mistakes.
The last win I celebrated was?
Alignment.
Girl, you got it. You're doing it. My favorite question to ask somebody is?
What can you teach me?
Okay. All right. I want to ask you just a couple more. Now, these are not like one questions. So you can kind of, explain yourself if you'd like, or if you want to answer bigger. But what is your current biggest contribution to the world?
Expanding the therapeutic beauty of boudoir.
Yes, girl. Yes, 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 yes.
The,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just gonna say, you know, I fell into the boudoir industry, kind of by accident. I was requiring additional income because I was bringing my husband home from work because of pretty intensive PTSD that was affecting his work life situation. And I didn't quite make enough money in the corporate position that I was working at that time in order to make ends meet. And so I got a day job, and photography was supposed to be my day job. And I accidentally fell into boudoir because I did just like a marathon um, situation with some friends who I asked, like, will you guys let me try this out? I want to see whether it's something I like.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved working with women, but I am not a super feminine woman. I lean more masculine in a lot of different areas. I don't typically wear makeup, like the lashes that you see I have on because I was in Hawaii and I didn't want to have to like, you know, mess with makeup in any way, shape, or form. And so I got my lashes done. I generally like dress pretty plainly. I'm just a little bit more of a tomboy. And so I will have people ask me, they're like, how did you end up in this? Like,
Right.
you of people where you're like glamming women up and focusing on the importance of like these sexy pictures and the way that they look and all of that good stuff. And it was because after that marathon day of spending time with friends of mine who were willing to let me try this out, I watched their lives change so drastically after a boudoir session. And I got so introspective about why the hell that happened. Why could
you got curious?
Yes, I got curious. Why could in one day they manage the shift in self-talk that took me 10 months of DBT to get through? And I like, we like, this would be a whole other topic because this is actually
We
what
might. So I think
about.
we this is going to be like, there might be a part 2 to this, and then there might be a part 3 to this.
Right? This is actually, so the talk that you heard me do was when you talked about like the topic, that was WPPI last year.
Okay.
And I did I was a keynote speaker at Imaging in January this last year, and my talk was on the impact of curating a client experience that or curating a client experience for impact. And I talked about what I watched Boudoir do. And I have watched countless women now cross my threshold and come into this space where they are talking to themselves differently. And that immediately starts making these incredible, profound shifts in their world.
Yeah.
And I spent so much time philosophizing on like why the hell this happens and why sexy pictures have the ability to curate this like crazy shift in their lives. And that's what I actually did my talk on at Imaging, because I believe so strongly that if boudoir photographers are intentional in the way that they build their client experience, that we can heal an entire generation, maybe multiple generations of women. And I actually feel very strongly that the self-love movement that we have watched taking place over the last 5 years or so is in part because of boudoir.
Yeah.
Because we have played an instrumental role in changing the self-talk of your everyday woman. And and that's why I do what I do. And that is why I educate on what I educate, because I believe so strongly that like treating this genre as some kind of flippant, super fun day of like glamour shots is doing it such deep injustice that I have just gotten on this platform to talk to people as often as I can about how this can change your entire life.
Yes, this is a self-transforming. Empowerment is a great word. Empowerment is a great word, but transforming is the word that I choose to use because it can transform your inner self. Like it really can, so that you can start to see what everybody else sees. You can start to believe and see. I love that. It's 100%. I'm on board with that. You are speaking my lingo right now for sure. Andrea, like, holy shit.
This has been a long one. You have been so patient.
No, I just enjoyed learning about you. I think, when we give people the space to be, you said that, and I think that the video that you did, that you are an open book, and you are 100% an open book. You didn't hesitate when I said I really want to interview you. Just kind of, you were like, let's do it. Like, it's twisted as fuck, but let's do it, and God, you were so honest and transparent. That anybody, I hope my desire is that anybody that, sees this can see your heart through and through, and who you are as a person, like who you strive to be, who you work to be, and that really correlates. You are a beautiful person, what you do, how you educate. I know that you said that there, and I'll be honest with you, I wanted to do speaking, and I wanted to do some teaching, and it scared the fuck out of me. Like when I started reading everything, I was like, I don't know if I, could handle all of that. And it really made me step back and really just kind of even think myself before I jump into too heavy of something. But I also hope that, you have something coming out soon. It sounds like you have some kind of software that you might be transitioning into and kind of getting out of the field altogether. But I think your contribution to the world of boudoir and education and teaching is so huge and impactful that sit on it a little while longer. Don't make, an impulsive, which we talked about, decision. And I know that you probably are. I know that you're probably very much thinking about it, but you have so much to give, and I hope that, you continue to give that to the industry in whatever way you feel is best. And if it's not in big group settings, and if it's just, online teaching or whatever the case may be, I hope that you continue doing that, because you are very impactful.
I really appreciate you. I have had a lot of really, really beautiful messages that have kind of hit my DMs, and people reaching out who have been saying similar things. And I don't know what all of this looks like on my end.
Sure.
You're exactly correct. I am going to be launching myself headfirst into the tech industry here before too long. But it is, I love this community with a deep, profound longing almost, where I am just, it's always been so close to my heart to help encourage people to understand the level of impact that they can have in this world. And that is ultimately always what I wanted to do. Once I got into a place of healing, my goal in the world was to leave it better than I arrived in it.
Yeah.
And that is the root basis of everything that I do, is wanting to curate a better world than the one that I came into.
Yeah.
And I'm going to keep doing that. And I don't know if it is going to be, headfirst into education, or, hey, maybe I end up with a podcast someday, or I'm writing self-help books.
Yeah. And you're writing that book. That's right. I love that. I love it. I appreciate you, your time, your knowledge, the experience, the openness of your heart. I really, really do appreciate you. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart.
I thank you. Thank you for having me on, for hearing me, for giving me an opportunity and a space for people to get to know me better. I appreciate you so much.
For sure. To many more conversations, hopefully, to come.
I would love that.
All right. All right, lady. Well, we're out. That's it for Between the Sheets with this episode with Andrea Mendoza. You guys, please check it out. We will drop all of the links of where you can find her, where you can see her education, where you can see what she's done, her website, all of that good stuff. Instagram, we will be dropping that in the links. So please like, subscribe, and show some love. Be kind, be courteous, have compassion and forgiveness and grace. Love one another. You guys, we are out.